Welcome to Starbound. My name's Aram, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyrin and Remike. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. Rain pounded the training field, turning the Doot into a soupy mess that sucked at the boots of 24 miserable recruits. They stood at rigid attention, their faces fixed in the 1,000-yard stare that was the only defense against the tornado of profanity currently circling them.
What in the name of sweet baby Jesus do you call that pathetic display?
Staff Sergeant Bill Rawlins stalked through the mud, his weathered face twisted into an expression of disgust that had made grown men weep. At 58, his body was a topographical map of military service. A jagged scar from shrapnel on his left thigh, burn marks from his right forearm, courtesy of the water wars, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull spoon.
I've seen dead men move with more enthusiasm. I've seen three-legged dogs run straighter lines.
He stopped in front of a trembling recruit whose soldiers were beginning to sag.
Am I boring you, Sunshine? Is my training interrupting your beauty sleep?
No, Drill Sergeant!
The kid barked, eyes forward.
Then why are you slouching like a damn tourist at Disney World?
Rawlins moved in until he was inches from the boy's face.
Stand up straight before I use your spine as a javelin!
The recruit snapped to attention, panic flashing across his features.
You think this is hard?
Rawlins addressed the entire squad now, his voice carrying across the field despite the downpour.
This isn't hard. This is kindergarten. Hard as watching your buddy bleed out in some godforsaken hellhole while taking fire from 3 directions.
He walked the line, studying each face with the critical eye of a man who had been molding civilians into soldiers for 35 years.
Pain is just weakness leaving the body, and you are one weak son of a bitch!
He jabbed a finger at a particularly exhausted-looking recruit.
But I'm gonna fix that! By the time I'm done with you people, you'll either be soldiers, or you'll be gone! There is no third option!
2 hours later, as the mud-caked recruits dragged themselves toward the barracks, Sergeant Major Thompson approached the field. "Still breaking them down to build them up, Bill?" Rawlins grunted, wiping rain from his face. "Someone's got to do it. These kids think Call of Duty is combat training." Thompson chuckled. "Colonel Parker wants to see you. Says it's important. Important enough for me to miss chow." He said immediately. Rawlins sighed, the sound of a man who'd learned long ago that the Army's definition of immediately usually meant trouble. Colonel James Parker was one of the few officers Rawlins genuinely respected. They'd served together in Pakistan, where Parker had earned his reputation as an officer who actually gave a damn about his men. His office walls displayed the same photos as Rawlins' Wall of Pain, graduates who'd gone on to serve with distinction, and a few who never came home. "Have a seat, Bill." Parker gestured to a chair. "How's the new batch looking?" "Green as grass, sir, but they'll learn or they'll leave." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Parker slid a folder across the desk. "How much have you been following the news about our new galactic neighbors?" Rawlins snorted. "Enough to know they think we're primitives who got lucky finding their little club in space." "Not entirely wrong," Parker admitted. "We're the new kids on the block, but Command is working hard to change that perception, which brings me to why you're here." Rawlins felt a sense of foreboding. In his experience, conversations that started this way ended with him being voluntold for something unpleasant. The Galactic Defense Force, think of it as Space NATO, has invited Earth to send a representative for their new standardized combat readiness assessment. All member species must participate. "And?" Rawlins asked, already knowing the answer. "And you've been selected as Earth's representative." Rawlins stared at his old friend. With all due respect, sir, that's bullshit. I'm 6 months from retirement. Send one of the young studs from Special Forces. Parker shook his head. That's just it. They specifically requested an average military specimen, not a Special Forces type. They want to establish a baseline. Both men looked at each other for a moment before bursting into laughter. Average? Me? Rawlins wiped his eye. Jesus Christ. I know. Parker's smile faded. And this is important, Bill. This assessment will help determine Earth's standing in the GDF. High Command believes your experience makes you ideally suited. Meaning I'm expendable, Rawlins translated. Meaning you've survived more hell than most men could imagine, and you've spent 3 decades teaching others to do the same. Parker leaned forward. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Rawlins sighed heavily, feeling the weight of 35 years of service press down on him. When do I ship out? 3 days later, Rawlins stood in his sparsely furnished quarters, throwing essentials into a duffel bag. The walls were mostly bare except for a row of photographs, different classes of recruits he'd turned into soldiers, frozen in time at their graduation ceremonies. And one photograph, older than the rest, of a dark-haired woman with laughing eyes. He paused, touching the frame lightly. Hell of a retirement party, Marie, he murmured to his late wife's picture. Playing guinea pig for a bunch of aliens. His packing was interrupted by a knock. Enter! He barked. A nervous private stepped into the room.
Your transport is ready, Sergeant.
Rawlins nodded, zipping the bag. As an afterthought, he reached for the combat knife mounted on the wall. A worn K-bar that had been with him through 2 wars and more firefights than he cared to remember. Military flights never had. But a man should have a piece of home with him. The private's eyes widened at the sight of the legendary staff sergeant pocketing a knife like he was heading into combat, rather than a diplomatic mission. Relax, kid. I'm not planning to gut anybody. Rawlins shouldered his bag. Unless they really ask for it. The transport shuttle was like no aircraft Rawlins had ever seen. Sleek, silent, and moving with a fluid grace that made his stomach twist in ways 30 years of military flights never had.
First time in 0G?
Asked the pilot, a lieutenant whose boyish face made Rawlins feel ancient. What gave it away? Rawlins growled, white-knuckling the harness as the earth dwindled below.
The creative cursing, Sergeant. Though I think cock-juggling 0G bullshit is a new one for the record books.
Rawlins would have flipped him off if he dared release his death grip on the harness. 4 nauseating hours later, the shuttle docked with the massive structure that housed the Galactic Defense Force Assessment Center. As artificial gravity reasserted itself, Rawlins fought the urge to kiss the solid deck beneath his feet. A reception committee waited beyond the airlock, a bizarre collection of beings that made Rawlins' eyebrows climb toward his close-cropped gray hair. What the hell are those supposed to be? Walking ferns? He muttered, as green plant-like creatures with too many limbs shuffled past. The lieutenant gave him a warning look.
Try to remember you're a diplomatic representative, Sergeant.
I'm a drill instructor, not a diplomat, Rawlins growled. They want nice, they should have sent someone else. As the lieutenant was swallowed by bureaucracy, Rawlins found himself approached by a tall, unnervingly thin alien with elongated features. Its skin was a shade of off-white, and its eyes blinked independently of each other. Staff Sergeant William Rawlins of Earth? The translator device at its throat rendered the words in slightly stilted English. That's me. Rawlins tried not to stare at the creature's mouth, which seemed to move in all the wrong directions when it spoke. I am Senior Administrator Merle of the Pell. The alien gave what might have been a bow, though it looked more like a broken puppet collapsing.
I will be overseeing your integration into the assessment program.
Rollins squared his shoulders, instinctively falling into the parade rest stance that had been his default for decades. Lead the way. As they walked, Merle's voice took on a lecturing tone.
The Galactic Defense Force assessment is designed to establish standardized metrics for combat readiness across all member species. It is most unusual for a non-spacefaring race to be included so early in their development.
We may be new to space, but we've been fighting wars since we could pick up rocks, Rollins replied dryly. Merle's mouth parts twitched in what might have been amusement or disgust. Rollins couldn't tell.
Yes, your species' propensity for violence has been noted in preliminary reports.
They entered a large chamber where representatives of at least a dozen alien species were gathered. Some were immediately intimidating. A massive, gray-skinned brute with arms like tree trunks and a face that seemed to be all teeth and rage. Others were more subtle in their otherness. A sleek, feline-looking being whose movements suggested predatory grace.
The other assessment participants, Merle explained. You will be evaluated alongside them, though, of course, the metrics are adjusted for species-specific capabilities.
Rollins could feel multiple sets of alien eyes examining him, assessing the latest curiosity. From their expressions, those he could read, the verdict wasn't flattering. Let me guess, Rollins said. They're wondering why you brought in a primitive monkey. Merle's head tilted at an angle that made Rollins' neck hurt just looking at it.
Your perceptiveness is unexpected.
I've spent my life reading men who want to kill me, Rollins replied. Aliens aren't that different. The briefing that followed was delivered with the condescending patience of a teacher addressing particularly slow children. The test would last 72 Earth hours without rest periods. Medical monitors would ensure no permanent harm came to participants. The assessment would evaluate physical endurance, tactical thinking, combat skills, and psychological resilience. Throughout the explanation, Rollins noted the other participants. The massive gray alien, identified as Kurgomon of the Groth Dominion, dominated one corner of the room, radiating confidence and aggression. A sleek, predatorial being called Slit, a Tainari, watched everyone with calculating eyes that missed nothing.
A question, Earth being?
Merle had apparently noticed Rollins' wandering attention. Just wondering when we get to the hard stuff, Rollins said. This sounds like orientation week. A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through some of the aliens. Others, including Merle, seemed taken aback.
I assure you, Staff Sergeant, these tests represent the most extreme challenges our xenobiologists could design while maintaining participant safety,
Merle said stiffly. Rollins shrugged. If you say so. The tour that followed did little to change his assessment. The environmental chambers looked impressive, but reminded him of training facilities back on Earth. The combat assessment area was essentially a high-tech version of a firing range and sparring room.
This gravity chamber can simulate up to 3 times standard gravity,
Merle explained, indicating a reinforced room with ominous-looking equipment. Looks easier than the obstacle course at Fort Benning, Rollins commented, enjoying the way Merle's eye stalks twitched in apparent confusion. By the time they reached the quarters assigned to him, Rollins had thoroughly confused his alien guide with his lack of concern.
The assessment begins at 0600 station time, Merle said. Your monitor band will alert you.
The alien indicated a slim bracelet that had been fitted to Rollins' wrist upon arrival. Roger that. Rollins examined the Spartan room. A bunk, a small hygiene station, and not much else. Just like home. Merle hesitated.
Staff Sergeant, I feel I should inform you that the assessment has a 40% washout rate. There is no shame in
Hell, I lose more than that in the first week of basic, Rawlins interrupted. Get some sleep, Administrator. Tomorrow's gonna be a long day for all of us.
The common area was filled with alien participants when Rawlins entered that evening, seeking information more than company. He grabbed a ration pack, some kind of universal nutrient gel that tasted like cardboard dipped in battery acid, and found a seat at the periphery, watching the interactions. Kurgomon, the Groth warrior, was holding court, his booming voice carrying easily across the room as he regaled listeners with tales of conquest. The Tainari, Slit, sat alone, watchful and silent. Others formed small groups, some tense, some attempting bravado.
You are the Earth representative.
The question came from a stocky, red-skinned alien with 4 eyes and what appeared to be natural armor plating.
That's right,
Rawlins replied, taking another bite of the awful ration pack.
I am Dawn of the Tukari, the alien said. What is your combat specialization? Elite Squad? Assassination Corps?
Rawlins nearly choked on his food, fighting back a laugh.
I'm a drill instructor. I train soldiers.
Dorn's 4 eyes blinked in sequence.
You are a teacher, not a warrior. I was a warrior, now I make warriors.
Rawlins shrugged.
Been doing it for 35 years.
The exchange caught the attention of Kurgomon, who lumbered over, his massive frame casting a shadow over their table.
A human trains children,
Kurgomon announced, his words translating into a booming basso.
The Galactic Defense Force must truly despise Earth to send such an insult.
Rawlins continued eating, unimpressed.
Think what you want, big guy.
You do not fear the assessment? Dorn asked, seeming genuinely curious.
Should I?
Many fail, Dorn said. Even die, despite the safety measures. Rawlins set down his empty ration pack.
How many of you have actual combat experience? Not training, not simulations. Actual life or death combat.
The silence that followed was telling. Rawlins stood, stretching muscles that had begun to protest the station's slightly off gravity.
That's what I thought.
As he turned to leave, Kurgomon blocked his path.
Your species knows nothing of true combat. The Groth have been warriors for 10,000 years.
Rawlins looked up at the alien, unimpressed by the display of intimidation that had cowed the others.
Congratulations. We humans spent that time figuring out more efficient ways to kill each other. Good night.
He brushed past the stunned Groth, heading for his quarters. Behind him, the common room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Day 1 of the assessment began with a blaring alarm from the monitor band. Rawlins was already awake, having risen an hour earlier from habit formed over decades. He'd done his usual routine, push-ups, sit-ups, and stretches modified for the cramped quarters. The familiar burn, a welcome grounding sensation in this alien environment. The first test was the Environmental Endurance Chamber Complex. Participants would move through a series of interconnected rooms simulating extreme conditions sequentially. Heat, cold, toxic atmosphere, radiation, and low oxygen. No breaks between rooms. Each environment is calibrated to be survivable, but push the physiological limits identified for your species, Merle explained, as impassive technicians attached additional biomedical sensors to the participants. The alien administrator's voice held a detached, clinical tone. The objective is completion under duress, demonstrating resilience. Speed is secondary to successful navigation. Rawlins nodded curtly, eyeing the heavy, reinforced door leading into the first chamber. It looked like the entrance to an industrial furnace. Standard procedure, like SCRE school but with shinier toys and weirder classmates.
The door hissed open, revealing the heat chamber. It was beyond hot. It was a physical blow. A wave of desiccating 120 degrees Fahrenheit air slammed into him, smelling faintly of baking metal. It felt like standing too close to burning jet fuel on a tarmac. Sweat sprang out on his skin, only to be instantly wicked away by the parched atmosphere, leaving a tight, papery feeling. He saw a few aliens recoil, their unfamiliar physiologies reacting poorly to the sudden, dry inferno. One spindly insectoid being immediately began trembling violently. Amateurs, Rollins thought, suppressing a grimace. He ignored the urge to rush through, instead setting a deliberate, steady pace. Control your breathing. Conserve moisture. Don't let the panic reflex kick in. He watched Kurgomon, the massive Groth, stride through with apparent ease, his thick hide likely offering significant protection. But others, less adapted, were already showing strain, their movements becoming jerky, their breathing ragged through translator grills.
Badwater Ultramarathon was hotter,
Rollins muttered under his breath, the memory of desert training providing a strange comfort. The transition to the cold chamber was brutal. One moment, searing heat. The next, stepping through a shimmering thermal barrier into air so cold it felt like inhaling microscopic needles. Sub-zero temperatures shocked his system, the sudden clamp of cold stealing his breath for an instant. Frost immediately began to form on his eyebrows and the collar of his uniform. His fingers and toes screamed in protest, the familiar ache of deep cold settling into his bones. He instinctively tucked his chin, protecting his core, moving with the stiff, energy-conserving gait he remembered from winter patrols on the Korean DMZ. All around him, aliens were reacting drastically. A reptilian participant seized up completely, collapsing into a shivering heap. Another, furry and stout, seemed to fare better, but moved with painful slowness. Rollins kept moving, focusing on the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the artificially frosted floor.
Just gotta keep the blood flowing. Don't stop.
Next came the toxic atmosphere chamber. The airlock cycled, replacing the biting cold with a thick, soupy miasma that swirled with sickly green and yellow vapors. An automated voice instructed participants to don the provided breathing apparatus, a mask that covered his nose and mouth, fitting awkwardly over his human features.
The filtered air tasted metallic and stale. Each breath required conscious effort against the heavy, clinging atmosphere.
Visibility dropped to a few meters.
2 participants succumbed quickly, collapsing before technicians in environment suits could drag them out. Rollins saw Dorn, the Tukari warrior, falter, his armor plates heaving.
Steady breathing, Rollins grunted through the mask's comm, pausing beside the struggling alien.
Slow, deep, in through the nose filter, out through the mouth valve. Keep moving, warrior. Don't give the bastards a satisfaction.
He clapped Dorn on the shoulder plating, a gesture that transcended species, before pressing onward.
Damn pampered space cadets. The radiation chamber was psychologically the worst. No heat, no cold, no visible threat. Just a sterile gray room with an unnerving silence. The only indication of danger was the steadily climbing rad counter on his wrist monitor and the ominous hum from unseen emitters. Several participants froze, their alien senses perhaps detecting something humans couldn't, or simply paralyzed by the unseen, insidious nature of the threat. Rollins felt the primal urge to flee, the gut-level fear of invisible death. He pushed it down, drawing on decades of training. He thought of old exercises near decommissioned test sites, the constant low-level anxiety drilled out by procedure and discipline. Acknowledge the threat. Don't dwell on it. Keep moving. Objective is the door.
He focused on placing one foot in front of the other, ignoring the flickering red numbers on his wrist. Finally, the low oxygen chamber.
The air thinned dramatically, becoming instantly harder to draw. His lungs burned, demanding more oxygen than the environment could provide. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision, and a dull pounding started behind his temples. Rawlins immediately slowed his pace, forcing himself into the rhythmic pressure-breathing technique taught for high-altitude operations. Inhale deep, hold, exhale sharp. The world seemed to swim slightly, his limbs feeling heavy as lead. He saw Slit, the predatory Tainari, moving with strained grace, clearly affected but coping better than most. Kurgamon pushed through with sheer power, but even his massive form seemed labored. Rawlins focused on the exit, a bright rectangle in the hazy room, pushing forward with sheer grit. When he finally stumbled through the last airlock, gasping in the blessedly normal station air, medical staff rushed forward with oxygen masks and diagnostic scanners. Rawlins waved the mask away, leaning against the bulkhead and taking deep, deliberate breaths. "Just catching my breath," he panted, sweat plastering his short gray hair to his scalp. "How'd we do?" Merle consulted a glowing datapad, his eye stalks quivering slightly, a motion Rawlins was starting to interpret as surprise, or maybe agitation.
You are the third participant to complete the environmental sequence, and the only one recorded assisting another participant during the toxic phase.
Rawlins straightened, looking back toward the chamber exit where Dorn was now emerging, looking shaky but intact. "Any casualties?"
3 participants required emergency medical extraction and have been disqualified from the assessment, Merle stated.
17% attrition, Rawlins calculated automatically, wiping his face with his sleeve. Not bad for the first hurdle. Better than I expected for this lot. Merle's translator seemed to hesitate, the synthesized voice slightly uneven.
Staff Sergeant, your vital signs throughout the sequence were anomalous. All indicators showed significant physiological stress, elevated heart rate, core temperature fluctuations, yet your performance degradation was minimal compared to projections. Your readings were consistently in the high-stress, pre-failure zone, yet you maintained function.
Rawlins shrugged, rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks. Just another Tuesday at the office, Administrator. The mandatory medical assessment that followed only deepened the confusion of the alien doctors. Their advanced instruments mapped out the micro tears in his muscle tissue, the elevated cortisol levels, the dehydration markers, clear evidence of a body pushed hard. Yet Rawlins himself sat calmly on the examination table, sipping a nutrient solution and looking mildly bored.
Are you certain you do not require recovery stimulants or cellular regeneration therapy?
A Pell physician asked, tilting its head as it cross-referenced readings that clearly didn't match the subject's demeanor. Rawlins chuckled, a rough, gravelly sound. Doc, save the good stuff for when it actually hurts. I'm just getting warmed up. Back in the communal recovery area, the atmosphere had shifted. The remaining participants, fewer now, eyed Rawlins with a mixture of grudging respect, suspicion, and outright disbelief. Kurgamon, the Groth warrior who had powered through the chambers with impressive resilience himself, seemed particularly agitated by the human's unexpected performance. He stomped over, his massive frame casting a shadow.
Your primitive species cannot possibly possess such innate endurance!
Kurgamon boomed, his translator turning the guttural sounds into booming bass.
You must be chemically or genetically enhanced beyond standard parameters.
Nope. Rawlins took another swig of the vaguely citrus-flavored nutrient drink. He pointed his thumb at his own chest. Standard issue, 58-year-old model. Comes factory-equipped with decades of living in crappy conditions and training in worse ones. We call it experience.
You expect us to believe a mere trainer?
A smooth, sibilant voice interjected. It was Slit, the Tainari,
speaking for the first time directly to Rollins. His predatory eyes narrowed.
Possesses the physical capabilities exceeding some of our designated elite warrior castes.
I expect you to believe what you just saw,
Rollins replied evenly, meeting the Tainari's gaze without flinching.
Human history is mostly about finding new ways to survive hardship and kill each other, son. My particular slice of that history includes 2 major wars, 24 minor conflicts, and 35 years turning soft civilians into people who can march through hell and ask for seconds. You don't do that without learning to endure. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances, their translator devices buzzing quietly as they processed his words. Dorn approached cautiously.
What manner of warfare does your species practice that requires such extreme conditioning?
Dorn asked, genuine curiosity in his 4 eyes. Rollins leaned back, considering the question.
All kinds, he said finally. Fighting in jungles so thick you can't see 5 feet. Deserts so hot your eyeballs cook. Cities turned to rubble. We fought knee-deep in mud with bayonets, and now we train kids to fight alongside autonomous drones and orbital artillery. He took another drink, letting the silence hang. Hell, the training pipeline just to qualify for frontline infantry is designed to break most people. This is just a brisk walk.
The afternoon brought combat efficiency tests, a series of evaluations with various weapon systems, both familiar and alien. Rollins excelled with anything resembling projectile weapons, his decades of firearms training translating effectively.
This is basically a fancy rifle,
he muttered, examining an energy weapon that the Pell instructor had described in incomprehensibly technical terms. His first shots went wide, but he quickly adjusted, applying basic marksmanship principles: steady position, breath control, trigger squeeze.
Remarkable adaptation,
Merle noted, observing from a distance.
Most species require significantly more training with unfamiliar weapon types.
A gun is a gun,
Rollins replied, placing his next 3 shots in a tight grouping.
Just gotta figure out how it pulls.
The hand-to-hand combat assessment proved more challenging. Paired against a Groth warrior, not Kurgomon, but similarly massive, Rollins found himself at a significant disadvantage in terms of strength and reach. The Pell instructor began explaining the rules, but Rollins had already assessed his opponent. The Groth was powerful but slow, with an obvious tendency to protect its side. An old injury, perhaps. When the signal came, the Groth charged with a roar, expecting to overwhelm the smaller human with brute force. Rollins sidestepped, using the alien's momentum against him, and struck with precise force at the weak point he'd identified. The Groth crashed to the ground, bellowing in pain and surprise.
Inelegant technique,
the Pell instructor commented disapprovingly. Rollins helped his opponent up.
Dead is dead. Fancy don't matter.
He demonstrated the strike again, slowly.
See? Simple strike, modified for your anatomy. Works on humans, too.
The instructor's eye stalks quivered in disapproval, but the watching participants murmured with new interest. The tactical challenge that evening required participants to formulate attack plans for various scenarios displayed in a holographic simulator. The Pell evaluators clearly expected sophisticated responses utilizing advanced technology and complex maneuvers. Rollins' plans were straightforward: secure high ground, establish fields of fire, maintain unit cohesion, and concentrate force at the enemy's weak points.
This approach seems primitive,
one evaluator commented, studying Rollins' solution to an urban combat scenario.
It's effective, Rollins countered. All your fancy tech and plans go to hell when the shit hits the fan. Combat is chaos. The side that maintains discipline and exploits basic advantages usually wins.
But surely, with particle beam technology and gravity manipulation,
tools change. Principles don't,
Rollins interrupted.
You wanted perspective from Earth's military? This is it. Keep it simple, train for basic competence, and have a backup plan when everything goes wrong, because it will. The other participants were presenting far more elaborate plans involving complex flanking maneuvers and technological solutions. Rawlins watched, shaking his head at particularly unrealistic proposals.
Problem, Staff Sergeant?
Merle asked, noticing his expression. Half these plans fall apart as soon as the enemy does something unexpected, Rawlins said. Or when your first casualties start screaming, or when communication breaks down.
You anticipate failure?
I plan for it. Rawlins met the alien's gaze steadily. That's how you survive long enough to succeed. Day 2 began with an endurance march. Participants loaded with heavy packs traversing a course under simulated high gravity. The weight was calibrated for each species, though Rawlins suspected the Pell had overestimated human limitations.
You call this heavy?
He grunted, settling the pack more comfortably as the gravity increased to nearly twice Earth normal.
My ex-wife's emotional baggage was heavier than this pack.
Several aliens dropped out within the first hour, their physiologies unable to adapt to the combined strain of weight and gravity. Others pushed on with grim determination, but the strain showed in their movements. Rawlins did what he always did. He settled into a steady rhythm, controlling his breathing and focusing on placing one foot in front of the other. To keep his mind occupied, he began singing an old cadence call, its rhythm matching his pace.
C-130 rolling down the strip, 64 troops on a one-way trip.
The few remaining aliens gave him bewildered looks as he continued the cadence, voice steady despite the physical strain. By the third hour, fewer than half the original participants remained on the course.
Mission top secret, destination unknown, don't even know if we're ever coming home. What purpose does this vocalizing serve?
Gasped Dorn, the Tukari who had fallen into step beside Rawlins.
Keeps your mind off the pain,
Rawlins explained between verses.
Builds unit cohesion, and it passes the time. Fascinating psychological technique.
Dorn wheezed, clearly struggling.
Wanna try it?
The resulting attempt at human military cadence, delivered in the Tukari's gravelly voice through a translator device, was so absurdly awful that Rawlins found himself genuinely laughing for the first time since arriving on the station. By the time they reached the end of the course, only 8 participants remained, including Rawlins, Dorn, Kurgomon, and Slit. The others lay scattered along the route, having succumbed to exhaustion or injury.
How are you still functioning?
Merle demanded, reviewing Rawlins' medical readouts.
Your muscle tissue shows microtears consistent with extreme exertion. Your heart rate has been elevated for hours, and your core temperature is above your species' normal range.
Rawlins accepted a hydration pack, draining it in one long pull.
Because the march is over, but the mission isn't. You keep going until the job is done.
Even at risk of physical damage?
Merle seemed genuinely perplexed.
Especially then.
Rawlins stretched, feeling muscles protest.
That's the whole point of military training. To push past what your body says is the limit.
The underwater operations test that afternoon revealed the first challenge where Rawlins didn't excel. Several aquatic species completed the tasks with natural grace, while Rawlins worked methodically, conserving oxygen and focusing on efficiency over speed. When he finally surfaced, the Pell instructors seemed almost pleased to have found a human limitation.
Your performance was adequate,
one noted with what might have been satisfaction. Rawlins shrugged, water streaming from his uniform.
Can't win 'em all. Not my natural environment.
You are not disappointed?
The instructor seemed confused by his reaction.
Knowing your limitations is as important as knowing your strengths.
Rawlins replied. In a real operation, I'd send someone better suited for the job, or find a different approach. This pragmatic response clearly wasn't what the instructor had expected. The quiet confidence of someone secure enough to acknowledge weakness without being diminished by it seemed to confound the alien more than Rawlins' previous successes. As the station's artificial day cycle faded, the assessment transitioned seamlessly into its next phase: sleep deprivation. The communal area, previously a place for rest, transformed. Banks of harsh lights flickered on at irregular intervals, bathing the room in jarring brightness just as eyelids grew heavy. Discordant electronic tones and sudden bursts of static erupted from hidden speakers, shattering any attempt at mental calm. Mild, unexpected jolts from the monitoring bands on their wrists served as sharp reminders that rest was not permitted. All the while, complex cognitive tasks flashed onto screens: pattern recognition, tactical problem-solving, memory tests, demanding focus from increasingly frayed minds. Within hours, the toll became evident on most remaining participants. Kurgomon slumped, his massive form radiating frustration rather than aggression. Slit's normally fluid patterns became tense and jerky, his sharp eyes clouded with fatigue. Dorn struggled visibly, his translator occasionally outputting garbled words as his concentration fractured. Cognitive functions slowed across the board. Reflexes dulled, reaction times plummeted, and short tempers flared in muttered alien curses. Rawlins, however, seemed to hit a second wind. While others fought to stay upright, he prowled the room like he owned it, fueled by some internal reserve the Pell protocols couldn't touch. He became almost garrulous, regaling anyone within earshot, willing or not, with increasingly colorful war stories, his voice cutting through the engineered chaos. So there we were, 3 days, no sleep, rations gone, comms dead, knee-deep in swamp that smelled like something crawled in it and died. And this lieutenant, shiny as a new penny, pulls out the field manual like it's gonna magically grow us a pizza. Rawlins slapped his thigh, a harsh bark of laughter escaping him. You should have seen his face when I told him the sergeant major used page 47 to start a fire that morning. Priceless.
How do you remain so functional?
Dorn managed, his voice strained through the translator, his usual stoicism eroded by exhaustion. Rawlins paused his pacing, a wry grin cracking his weathered face. Ranger school, son. 61 days. Average maybe 3 hours sleep a night, sometimes less. They train the quitting right out of you. He leaned in conspiratorially. Compared to that, this is like a vacation spa. Want to hear about the time we navigated out of the Panamanian jungle using only a broken compass? The Pell observers, monitoring from behind one-way glass, watched with expressions oscillating between scientific fascination and outright alarm. Their carefully calibrated protocols, designed to induce cognitive failure within predictable species parameters, were having little effect on the human beyond making him chattier. Rawlins wasn't just functional, he seemed to be drawing energy from the challenge, his endurance defying their models. Our projections indicated significant cognitive decline in baseline humans after 18 hours under these conditions, Merle noted during a brief sensor check, his translator conveying a tone of deep consternation. Your species' capacity for sustained operations under extreme fatigue exceeds all known galactic benchmarks. Rawlins just winked, nodding towards the nutrient dispenser. This is nothing. Wait till you see what happens when we get our hands on coffee. Day 3 brought the psychological warfare test. Isolation chambers where participants were subjected to disorienting sensory experiences designed to break concentration and induce stress responses. For Rawlins, they attempted to simulate battlefield PTSD triggers. Explosions, screams of wounded comrades, flashing lights reminiscent of firefights. The Pell had clearly studied human psychology, but they'd underestimated the mental discipline of a career soldier. Rawlins employed techniques he'd taught to troops for decades: controlled breathing, mental compartmentalization, focus on immediate tasks. The memories surfaced: ambushes in Kashmir, friends lost in sudden violence, the particular smell of death that never quite left your nose. But he acknowledged them without being consumed. When he emerged 4 hours later, his face was set in grim lines, but his eyes were clear and focused.
You wish to discuss your experience?
A Pell psychologist offered, instruments indicating elevated stress markers.
I wish to tell you exactly where you can shove your psychological tests,
Rawlins replied evenly.
Using a soldier's dead friends against him is a special kind of low.
The alien backed away, alarm evident in its posture.
The test is designed to—
I know what it's designed to do,
Rawlins cut him off.
and I know why it failed. You want to break someone, you need to understand what they fear. I don't fear those memories. I honor them.
Only 4 participants remained for the final combat scenario: Rawlins, Kurgomon, Slit, and, surprisingly, Dorn. The Tukari had displayed unexpected resilience throughout the assessment, adapting and learning with quiet determination. The scenario was elaborate: a complex battle space populated with automated opponents that adapted to the participants' tactics. Each competitor would be evaluated individually. Rawlins watched as Kurgomon relied on brute strength and aggression. Slit employed stealth and precision, and Dorn used a balanced approach. Each was effective in their way, but all 3 eventually succumbed to the escalating challenges. When Rawlins' turn came, the scenario had been noticeably modified. More opponents, greater complexity, higher stakes.
Trying to break me?
He asked Merle directly, recognizing the manipulation.
Oh, my drill sergeant was meaner than you on his good days.
The scenario began with a simulated ambush, opponents converging from multiple directions with overwhelming firepower. Rather than retreat or advance, Rawlins immediately went to ground, using minimal cover and returning precisely aimed fire.
Conserve ammunition, maintain situational awareness,
he muttered, falling back on training so deeply ingrained it was instinct. The simulation escalated beyond its programmed parameters as the Pell, increasingly frustrated by Rawlins' performance, added more variables: environmental hazards, equipment failures, civilian complications. Rawlins adapted, shifting tactics to meet each new challenge. When conventional approaches failed, he improvised, using the environment, exploiting weaknesses in the simulation's logic, even allowing himself to appear defeated to draw opponents into vulnerable positions. After 3 grueling hours, he completed the scenario through a combination of brute force, creative tactics, and sheer stubbornness that the simulation simply wasn't programmed to counter. As the final opponent fell, Rawlins stood in the center of the virtual battlefield, breathing hard but upright. The simulation dissolved around him, revealing a room full of stunned Pell technicians.
Is that it?
He asked, wiping sweat from his brow. The final medical assessment revealed what the Pell physicians described as concerning indicators of physiological stress: elevated cortisol, muscle damage, marginal dehydration despite fluid replacement. Yet you remain functional, the lead physician noted with what sounded almost like accusation.
Told you I was just getting warmed up,
Rawlins replied, rolling his shoulder to work out a kink. When the full assessment team gathered for the final evaluation, Merle formally announced, "The 72-hour assessment protocol is now complete. All participants are to be commended for their efforts." Rawlins looked around at the other 3 finishers, all showing signs of exhaustion, and then back at Merle.
That's it? When does the real test start?
The room went silent. Even the translation devices seemed to pause, as if unsure they'd processed the words correctly.
This was the complete assessment, Merle finally responded. At maximum difficulty.
Rollins shrugged.
Huh. Reminded me of a light week in basic training back home.
The other aliens stared at him in disbelief. Kurgomon, despite his exhaustion, managed to look both outraged and grudgingly respectful. Slit's calculating gaze had taken on a new wariness. Dorn simply shook his head in apparent wonder with what amounted to a Tukari smile. The Pell administrators huddled in urgent conference. Their translators deliberately switched off as they gestured at data displays and argued in their native tongue. Finally, Merle approached Rollins, accompanied by a Pell in more elaborate attire.
Staff Sergeant Rollins, this is High Administrator Domodus of the Galactic Defense Force.
Rollins straightened to attention out of habit, offering a respectful nod.
Sir?
Your performance metrics are unprecedented,
Domodus stated, gesturing to a holographic display of Rollins' results compared to the other participants.
According to our xenophysiologists, you should have reached critical exhaustion during day 2.
With respect, sir, your xenophysiologists don't seem to know much about humans.
So it would seem,
Domodus said.
Staff Sergeant, we must ask directly, are you genuinely an average specimen of your species' military personnel? Our screening specifically requested standard baseline individuals, not elite operatives.
Rollins couldn't help it. He laughed, a deep, genuine belly laugh that echoed through the chamber.
I'm a drill instructor nearing retirement, he explained when he'd composed himself. I'm practically a desk jockey these days. I spend my time teaching kids how to be soldiers, not fighting on the front lines.
That cannot be accurate, Merle interjected. Your combat performance
is what any of my graduates could do, Rollins finished for him. Some better. You want to see something impressive? Talk to our Special Forces guys. Rangers, Berets, SEALs, Delta. Those boys make me look like a weekend warrior.
The Pell exchanged looks that transcended species barriers. Pure alarm.
You are suggesting that your military contains entire units with capabilities exceeding your own?
Domodus asked slowly.
Of course.
Rollins gestured to his gray hair.
I'm an old man by military standards. Our active combat units are younger, faster, and trained with newer techniques. I just have experience on my side.
This complicates matters,
Domodus admitted. The final conference took place in a chamber Rollins hadn't seen before, clearly a high-level administrative section of the station. Representatives from several species were present, including members of the GDF Leadership Council, their varied forms arranged around a large holographic display table.
Based on the assessment results and subsequent evaluation,
High Administrator Prell announced, his voice resonating with formal authority.
The Galactic Defense Force High Command has reached a decision regarding Earth's potential contribution to our combined security efforts.
Rollins stood at parade rest, the posture automatic, his gaze steady. He'd done what they asked. He'd shown them what an average human soldier, even one near the end of his career, could do. Now came the fallout.
The performance metrics demonstrated by Staff Sergeant Rollins, representing baseline human military conditioning, suggest significant deficiencies in current GDF readiness protocols.
Prell continued, surprisingly blunt.
Therefore, Earth will be invited to take a leading role in designing new, more effective, and considerably more rigorous training regimen for GDF combined forces.
Prell turned his attention directly to Rollins.
And we would like to offer you,
Staff Sergeant Rollins the position of Chief Training Advisor to oversee this restructuring. Rollins blinked, genuinely taken aback. He'd expected maybe a commendation, a handshake, and a shuttle ride home to his retirement paperwork. Chief Training Advisor for the entire GDF? He thought of the pampered recruits he'd seen struggle through what he considered basic drills. He thought of the reliance on tech over grit, the lack of understanding of fundamental combat realities, the sheer softness he'd witnessed. He thought of the warriors, Kurgomon, Slit, Dorn, who had potential but lacked the brutal conditioning that turned soldiers into survivors. He thought about his 35 years spent forging weapons out of recruits, the satisfaction of seeing them succeed, the pain when they didn't. Retirement suddenly seemed quiet. Too quiet. Could he really just walk away, knowing how unprepared these galactic forces seemed for the kind of gritty, attritional warfare humanity knew all too well? Could he hang up his uniform, knowing there was a vital job here that needed doing, a job perfectly suited to his unique, unpleasant skill set? Duty, ingrained over a lifetime, warred with the appeal of a quiet fishing boat. He looked at the assembled alien dignitaries, Hell administrators, reptilian commanders, beings of light and shadow. They needed help. They just didn't fully grasp how much yet. And maybe, just maybe, showing the galaxy what real soldiering looked like was a better capstone to his career than fading away. Earth needed a strong start out here, and this was a hell of an opportunity to establish that strength wasn't just about starships and energy weapons. Rollins straightened slightly, a decision solidifying in his mind. It wasn't orders from Earth, not a request from a colonel or a president. It was his choice, born from a lifetime of service and a critical assessment of the situation before him.
All right,
Rollins said, his voice cutting through the expectant silence.
I'll take the job.
He paused, letting the acceptance sink in before adding, his tone shifting back to the familiar growl of a drill instructor laying down the law.
But I've got conditions.
Such as? Domitus inquired.
I do this my way. No interference from committees or bureaucrats who've never seen combat. I pick my own staff, humans and aliens who actually know what they're doing. And I need complete authority over the training program.
The officials exchanged glances, some clearly uncomfortable with these demands. Those are significant conditions, Domitus noted.
You wanted Earth's expertise. That's the price.
Rollins crossed his arms.
Take it or leave it.
After a brief consultation, Domitus nodded. Agreed, with standard ethical oversight. When can you begin? Rollins allowed himself a small smile.
Immediately.
6 months later, Staff Sergeant Bill Rollins, now officially Chief Training Advisor Rollins, stood before the first class of the reformed Galactic Defense Force Academy. 40 recruits from 12 species waited nervously, having heard rumors about the new human training methods. Rollins paced before them, studying each face with the critical eye that had evaluated thousands of recruits over his career. Behind him stood his new cadre, a mix of human instructors and alien veterans he'd personally selected and trained.
Welcome to the first day of the rest of your lives,
he began, voice carrying across the field without need for translation.
You think you're tough? You think you're ready? You're wrong!
He stopped before a particularly confident-looking Groth recruit, one of Kurgomon's younger relatives, if he remembered correctly.
The galaxy is a dangerous place, filled with threats your fancy technology can't always solve. My job is to make sure you survive your first encounter with those threats, and I take my job very seriously.
He resumed pacing, letting the tension build.
Starting today, you will train harder than you've ever trained. You will hurt, You will bleed! You will question your life choices! But if you survive what I'm about to put you through, you will be the most effective fighting force the galaxy has ever seen!
He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the formation one last time.
That was just the welcome speech. Now your real training begins!
The looks of horror that spread across alien faces as Rollins barked his first order, sending them scrambling into a mud obstacle course modeled after Earth basic training, was almost comically satisfying. As the recruits slogged through the punishing course, Rollins allowed himself a small smile. This wasn't exactly the retirement he'd planned, but there was something deeply fulfilling about teaching a new generation how to survive, even if that generation had extra limbs, scales, or eye stalks. Earth might be new to the galactic community, but thanks to humans like him, they'd soon learn that when it came to military toughness, humanity wrote the book.
Move it, maggots!
He bellowed, feeling truly at home for the first time since leaving Earth.
My grandmother can move faster, and she's been dead for 30 years!
Some things, it seemed, were universal after all.